So, hi everybody. Welcome to this monthly webinar of Labs Berkeley. As many of you know from other webinars, my name is Mar Fayos. I'm a grad student at the Berkeley Global Jazz Institute, and I am also the Director of Outreach and Project Management at Labs Berkeley. To me, it is an enormous privilege to be able to have these two guests today that come from the recording. I want to say it right, the Recording Industry Association of America, RIAA. For those of you who want to Google it and get more information and get in touch with them. So the most interesting thing that we would like to talk about today actually is first of all introducing Joshua Friedlander, that is the Senior Vice President of Research and Economics, and also Matthew Bass. I'm pronouncing it good, or is Bass?
Nope.
Bass?
Yep, Bass.
Perfect. Yay. Great. That is the research manager. And they put together the year-end 2020 RIAA US Latin Music Revenue Report that showed amazing data about the Latin music industry in the US throughout the last year, and like how it has been changing in the last couple of years. So I'm just going to let them introduce themselves and the work that they do, and then we can get hands-on and talk more about it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having us. It's nice to meet everybody. I think that was a very good introduction. I don't know how much more it needs. I'll add that I've been at the RIAA since 2005, so I can't believe I've actually been there that long, but it's been a lot of fun, and the industry has changed quite a bit in that time. Before that, I worked on Wall Street and I went to business school, so that's my background kind of coming into this job, and I'm doing it because I really wanted to work in some way in the music biz. I enjoy the economics, I enjoy the research and dealing with the numbers, but it matters a lot that it has to do with music, and that's very much why I'm there. And it's safe to say that that's why a lot of our colleagues are there, even people who are attorneys and work in policy or communication specialists. We're not professional musicians, but everyone we work with is a huge music fan. Many people play instruments either as a hobby, or some of them are extremely good in playing some bands after hours. So, and we're always happy to talk to students. So thank you for having us.
Josh didn't mention that he's actually very good at guitar. He just doesn't show it off a lot. But my name is Matt Bass, and I've been working with Josh since I think 2013. I don't actually remember the start date, but that feels like 8 or 9 years ago, if my math is right. I came to this job the same way Josh did, really wanting to do something in the music industry. And this was a perfect kind of combination for me to do the data analysis that I love to do in my spare time, as well as do something involved in music industry. So it's a perfect combination for me. Before that, I was working some government jobs in DC, working for some federal agencies. And luckily, this job fell out of the sky, and Josh brought me on.
Yeah, so thank you so much for being here. And now I know that Josh mentioned before in the preparation of this meeting that you had some slides that you wanted to share to actually explain a little bit more of what you do and the research itself. So if you would like to start, I think that it would be a great time to actually learn from it before we get into talking more about the subject.
I'm happy to. I'm going to share my screen in a moment as soon as I figure out how to. And if there are questions, you can certainly type them into chat, or I don't know if there are emotions enabled on this, but you could raise a hand. So give me a moment. And I apologize. There we go. Share screen. Hopefully that does it. Okay, so can everybody see my screen now?
I can.
This is great. Thank you very much. So that we have a little introduction here. We don't need to go through that, but so we're going to talk a little bit about the RIAA. The RIAA is the trade group for the music industry, and specifically the music labels in the United States. There are similar groups in other countries, There's IFPI, which is like a global version of what we do. And we work very closely with those other groups. So there's a group in Canada, in the UK, in Spain, in Mexico. We've worked with all those groups at various points, as well as the IFPI, that international group. Our job is to represent mostly the labels. That is who our clients are. We represent the labels as a trade organization, which means industry communications, industry business affairs, so dealing with a variety of federal agencies and sound exchange, and of course policy, which would be how the law and how potential laws are going to affect the music business. Matt and I, of course, are the research department, where we do a lot of surveys. We do a lot of processing of data, a lot of sharing of data to help fuel those other things that the RIAA does, to help with communications, to help with policy. We also do content protection. So I'm sure everybody understands if we talk about music piracy and the issues that raises. The RIAA is very active, along with IFPI, in trying to combat music piracy in the United States. So those are kind of the big pieces. Matt, why don't you take a second to talk about what we do for the data that we're going to present today?
Right, so hopefully you all have seen the report that we just released. If you haven't, you can find it on our website under the Facts of Research page. We have a short summary that you can see online. And the way we get that data, well, first I think it's important to say that the United States is a little bit more difficult to quantify what Latin music means to the consumer, because whenever you look at a territory like Spain or Mexico, we kind of calculate all of the revenue that's produced in those territories and count it as Latin music. Whereas Josh has some slides later that will show the impact of Latin music in the United States. But when we try to quantify the size of the market in the United States, we have to define it as traditional Latin music, something that has Spanish language, or generally the charts recognize as a Latin song or album. The way we collect this data is our member companies that Josh mentioned send us detailed information about the number of CDs that are sold, not so much in the Latin space, I guess, but how many songs are streamed on Spotify, how many songs are streamed on YouTube, what the value of those plays are. And our job is to aggregate all of that together and to make some estimates for the non-reported side, so the true indies that don't belong in our membership and don't give us data directly. So we use third-party data aggregators to help us, try to make sense of the size of the music industry that is outside of our purview. So that's kind of the scope of how we get the data. And then we, once we have that data set, we have many uses for it. And I think Josh has a good layout of that.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to jump ahead and we'll talk more about the use of it later to, what we're actually seeing in the market, which I think is probably the biggest takeaway. I think, after this presentation, you don't need to know who Matt or I are, but knowing what's going on in the market in the United States is really important. The US is about a third, a little more than a third of the global music market. So the trends that we're seeing in the US are often leading indicators of what we're seeing around the world. And of course, the US is the most important individual music market. So these really matter, to artists everywhere, to see what's going on. So this is just a nice kind of longer term view of what's been happening in the overall market. This is not just Latin music. This is the total US market. And this is adjusted for inflation. So you could see that for the last 5 years, you've really seen a recovery in the United States. And the growth has been good, but we're still a long way from where we were at the industry's height. Now, 1999 was the highest, the biggest the market has ever been in the United States, adjusted for inflation, almost $23 billion. And today in 2020, in the most recent year in 2020, it was about $12 billion. So just a little more than half, even after those years of recovery. Now, you might wonder what happened in 1999. 1999 is the year Napster launched. So for anybody who says that those things didn't make a difference, we worked in the industry during that time. And if you thought it was hard getting an internship now, you can't imagine what it was like finding a job back then, because we went from 5 major label sets to 4 to 3. Sales got cut more than in half, and it was incredibly difficult and a painful time to be in the industry. It's great to see the industry has recovered, and this chart helps show you how that happened. So that blue on the bottom there is physical revenues. So that's CDs, vinyl records, cassettes, any kind of physical format. And you could see for a long time, that was the entire market and the majority of the market afterwards. The purple is digital downloads. I think people thought digital downloads would have become a bigger part, but you could see they never became nearly as big as physical was, back in the 90s and early 2000s. So digital downloads contributed, but they never really drove the market back up. But then around 2010 or so, we see streaming really start to take off. And streaming existed before then, but it didn't have as big an impact. And then around 2015 and going forward, we finally saw streaming growing so much that it was actually offsetting the declines that we were seeing in physical and then the shrinking digital download market. So this is that macro view to get a sense, of what was happening in the market. And then of course, in the last 5 years, we've had some strong growth from 2015 through 2020. So this is the overall market. And then we're just kind of zooming in for what happened in the Latin market, the Latin music market. Here you have our revenues for the last couple of years. Now, from that earlier slide, unfortunately, we don't have anything as consistent just for Latin music, but all those trends you saw, they're very similar for Latin, but for Latin music, they're actually more intense. When the market was doing poorly, Latin music did worse. When the market was recovering, Latin recovered faster. So all those things that we were seeing are happening faster in the Latin music market. The industry transformation has been incredible over a short period of time. This is looking at the overall market. In 2010, the industry was still half physical. Digital downloads were a little more than a third, and streaming was just getting started. Fast forward about 10 years to 2020, streaming is 83% of the market overall. Digital downloads have shrunk, and physical has shrunk remarkably from more than half to less than 10%. And then sync has been very steady. That's use of music in video games, commercials, those types of things, movies, TV. That's been a pretty steady percentage at like 2 or 3%. Now, So music is also leading the way in digital compared to other industries. More than 90% of music revenues are from digital distribution formats. That's way ahead of video games, movies and TV, magazines, books. All of those other traditional media formats are trying to catch up in terms of where music is. I think what's incredible is that video games are inherently digital, and they still don't have as much digital distribution as music because people still buy video game discs. This is the slide I wanted to show everyone. So on the left, you have the overall streaming market in 2020, and on the right, you have the Latin music market. Latin music is almost entirely streaming in the United States at this point. Downloads and physical market and sync are very, very small. So streaming is much more important to the Latin market than it is to the overall market. And at this point, we're basically talking about, virtually the entire market is streaming. This is going back, I call out paid subscriptions because this has been the most important driver of this recovery. On the left, you have the total revenues. You can see how quickly that's grown over the last couple of years. And on the right, you have the number of subscriptions. And this is really what's been driving the recovery. This is the number of subscriptions in the US alone to full service, music subscriptions. So this is your Apple Music and Spotify and Amazon Unlimited. This does not include Pandora. This does not include free Spotify. This does not include YouTube. So just from those paid subscriptions, you can see more than 75 million people, more than 75 million subscriptions in 2020. And you can see that that's been growing quickly. The number of people is even higher. The way we pull these metrics together, a family plan. So if anyone has one of those shared family plan subscriptions, that still only counts as one. So this isn't number of people, this is number of subscriptions. The number of people would be even higher. When we take that overall market and then again zoom into what's going on for Latin music, you could see, streaming is the vast majority of the market. And here's a bit of how it's broken up. You know, on the bottom you have paid subscriptions, and on the middle you have this on-demand ad-supported. That's a fancy way of saying YouTube and free Spotify. You know, where you can listen to a song and pay for it by hearing an ad. And then we've got a group called Digital and Customized Radio. That services that pay through Sound Exchange. And for anybody who's listening to this call who doesn't know what Sound Exchange is, if you're going to be involved in recording music, I strongly recommend you do, because that's who is going to handle your revenues when your music gets played on satellite radio or on Pandora or on internet radio. So that's a really important part of the market, and especially important for Latin music. Here's the breakdown between those groups. You can see paid subscriptions by revenue are the biggest part at 70%. And then you have this ad-supported group. That was the YouTube and free Spotify, and then the digital radio. And this mix is very different for Latin music than it is for others. For Latin music in the US, these the free services like on-demand, ad-supported, and the online radio are significantly over-indexed. And I think, yes, this is a little bit of a complicated slide, but basically you could see in these middle categories, direct payments, audio streams, video streams, Latin music is significantly above that line. That dotted line down the middle is the 5.5% that Latin music represents of the total US market. But for these other groups, Latin music is presenting a much bigger share. And then if you look below for digital downloads and then ringtunes, which is very, very small, and sync, Latin music's accounting for a much smaller part of the market. So this really lets you see how different the Latin music market is from the overall market in the United States, and it's very heavily weighted towards the free streaming services. That can mean a lot of things depending on the audience. It can mean how people are accessing the music. It of course matters for how revenues are calculated. You know, it's much tougher to generate revenues on free streaming services than on subscription services. But this is where Latin music consumption is really happening in the US. As I mentioned before, Latin music, when I said Latin music is recovering faster, this is the result. The share of the market accounted for by Latin music is growing. So a couple of years ago it was 4.5%, then in 2019 it was 5%, now it's 5.5%. So Latin music is growing as part of the US market, in addition to growing in terms of the revenues. This complicated slide is actually, I was just, you know, as we were preparing for this, I'm sharing something. This is not RIAA data. This is actually from SoundScan, from Nielsen MRC SoundScan. They're looking at the volume, and you can see Latin music's actually right in the middle. I don't know if you're able to see, I have a pointer, but you can see the blue bar is basically on-demand streams. But this dark blue, that's on-demand video streams. And you could see how much bigger it is for Latin music than it is for any of these other genres. So, you know, on the left, you have the industry total is 5%, R&B, hip hop, rock, it's only 3%, pop 5%, but for Latin, it's almost 12%. So this is another way of pointing to how people are listening to Latin music. And it's very over-indexed again for free video streams. So that's what we're seeing, you know, as a big point of consumption. Also from that, you could see kind of who are the top albums and top artists. You know, Latin music, not just showing up on Latin charts, but showing up on mainstream charts has really been an emergent theme the last couple of years. And as you can see, it's not just Despacito. You know, there's a lot of other songs that are reaching really, really high numbers. You know, these album numbers on the right, you know, 1.5 million, 400,000. That's success for mainstream artists, not just for Latin artists. I want to include a little bit of data on how people are listening and its interaction with social media, because this is a really important trend. This is not specific to Latin music, and this is from survey data that the RIAA does. You know, we ask people, you know, who use social media, you know, what are you doing on these social media sites? What are you doing on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter? And the number one answer is consistently music. You know, following, you know, top artists, following their favorite bands, sharing them with their friends, tweeting about them, watching their videos is the number one thing people are doing on social media. So we like to say music is fueling social media. It's great that there are these platforms, but what people are going to these platforms for is music content. And then you can see on the right, we actually have a site called Music Fuels where we track, the top 10 accounts on all these sites, and they're consistently, music is always highly, highly represented. The most followed people on Instagram and Twitter are always musicians. The top videos on YouTube are always music. So music has really an outsized presence. That research was done on kind of the quote unquote traditional. Here's that Music Fields website. These are done in, let's call them, the traditional social media platforms: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. But we're also starting to look at some of the emerging newer platforms for social media: TikTok, Twitch, Reels, and Triller. And we're again seeing, just like with the other ones, music is consistently the top thing that people are going there to see, or one of the top three. Sometimes you'll see comedy or some other areas. But when people are going to TikTok, they're going there for music. So just like with the older social media platforms, we're continuing to see music be the real driver there. So that was kind of all we had prepared in terms of data. I'm very happy to answer questions about this work, any other research that we're doing, or really anything else. I'm going to stop sharing the screen at this point, if I can. There we go.
Yeah, wow. At this point, thank you so much, first of all, for this deep presentation of a lot of data that was also like very digestible and very well explained. Like, I think that we are all a little bit astonished and processing all the information. So now
That's
I
a lot
have
of data. Yeah.
that's a lot, but it's like really well presented and done. And yeah, I just have a lot of questions, so I'm just gonna go for it. And then we also have yeah, there's people saying like amazing. We also have some questions from the attendees, so we are gonna get to them shortly after. uh yeah, one of the things that is very curious about what you mentioned is the factor of the age that I don't really see represented on the graphic, but it seems that for the information that you are delivering, so basically saying that the most followed accounts are artists, that the music is uh, like the protagonist of all the social media channels, that also specifically Latin music is very visual, and the kind of consumption that it has, that it's more like free streaming platforms. I would like to know if you have actually data that relates with the ages or like the socioeconomics of the audience that can explain all of these results.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is yes, we do have some. We have a little bit of it on our website that we can share. Matt, maybe if you don't mind, can you share the consumer profile page from, I think we still have it from 2019. We don't have the 2021 yet. Um, that gives some information about music listening. But when we look at, for example, especially with Latin music, by the way, if we say not who's listening to music, but if we say who's listening to Latin music, we absolutely do see a kind of a youth explosion where we have a lot more listeners like in the younger age groups. We usually look like 18 to 24, 25 to 34, that kind of, Gen Z and millennial group. We absolutely do see those groups much more involved in social media. And that if we look at Latin music specifically, the listener group is noticeably younger, and we're trying to put that data together in some ways that'll kind of share that a little more. Um, it's tricky finding ways to present it necessarily, but I think your intuition is correct that for those newer interactions, it is absolutely driven by youth. Unfortunately, I can't put like a percentage on it, but I can confirm that it's significantly higher for Latin music when we look at like that under age 34 group.
Thank you. Then something that really caught my attention at the very beginning was that how Latin music is like always evolving faster than the other ones in terms of tendencies of the market. So how when the industry is actually growing in revenue, the Latin music is the one that makes it faster and goes like really high, but then is also suffering the consequences when the industry doesn't go that well. So I would like to know, like, what is the reasoning or the explanation that you have found behind this?
Yeah, I mean, that's first of all, that's that's just looking at the trends for the last 15 years or so. Unfortunately, we don't have that long a history of tracking the Latin market this way. There are a few, let's call them mechanical things that are happening that I think are causing that. And then there are some things happening on the music side. From the mechanical side, in terms of what's going on in the market, and I'm not talking about mechanical, I don't mean mechanical licensing revenue. I just mean in terms of like how people are listening. um, Digital downloads never really took off for Latin music. So when piracy was an issue, which it very much was in the 2000s, um, digital downloads on like iTunes helped offset that. But unfortunately, the Latin market just never got a lot of digital download uptake. So it didn't have that piece that was offsetting it. And I'll also add, at the time, Latin music was one of the most pirated formats of music, most pirated genres. Generally, it was pop, like Britney Spears pop, um, urban, rap, hip hop, and Latin. So those three were the genres hit hardest by piracy. So that's why that decline was so fast. And then since digital downloads were never a big part of the Latin music listening, when the market came back, Latin music was already being streamed. So as streaming blew up, it took Latin music with it. So, since streaming is what's driving the recovery, Latin music was already there. So I think that's why it's doing better on the other side as well. In addition to that, in the last couple of years, we've seen Latin music crossing over to mainstream in a way that we had never seen before. It certainly happened before, there were Shakira and J-Lo. There have absolutely been artists in the past, but the number of Spanish language songs on the mainstream charts is higher than ever. So we're really seeing an expansion of the audience as well, because that kind of adoption we just didn't see before. So I think it's the combination of all those factors that's making Latin music grow as part of the market.
I have something to add. It's not related to our US data, but Josh mentioned earlier that we have a sister organization in the IFPI, and they're based out of London, and they work with all the trade associations like United States. So they would have someone in Brazil and in Mexico. And I think the story of Latin music that's coming out of their report this year is that the access to internet is growing rapidly in those places, and it's really expanding very quickly. So that's not as much a US story, but I think if you're going to talk about Latin music globally, those regions are showing the strongest growth are the Latin regions. And I think the access to internet is really pumping that up.
Yeah, thank you so much about that. That actually makes a lot of sense. And while you are talking, and I am sure that most of the audience is going to share this thought as well, like a lot of things that we are experiencing ourselves and we are seeing in some artists that are making more sense. For example, like why artists now, especially in the Latin industry, tend to like be releasing singles and put it out there with very nice and expensive videos, and this is not happening that much in other genres, for example. So this may explain like why they are doing it this way, because it catches more attention, more views, and more revenue for them that way.
I think you're right. There's global appeal. And I think it's worth mentioning as well, just continuing to build on that same topic. I think the diversity of music in the US market is certainly greater than I've ever seen before. I think Latin music is represented there as well, but we're also seeing K-pop and J-pop and C-pop, that we're seeing. You look at the top 10 in the United States, and there are bands from Korea and China and Mexico. Puerto Rico is part of the United States, but it is different, but it's in Spanish instead of in English. It used to be that even the crossover, a lot of times it was like the English translation or something, and now we're seeing Spanish. I saw there was a question in the chat about artists working together. Obviously Despacito is kind of the big thing. It certainly seems like and this is anecdotal. This is not based on like a market research piece, but certainly anecdotally, it absolutely seems like you're getting more of the, you know, artists working together, you know, combining, you know, with a Latin artist, with a more traditional artist working together. I think Despacito set the template for that, and other people are trying to copy it because it was so successful. And then if it's in Spanish, then we're including it in the Latin music, in our data for Latin music.
Matt, were you about to say something? I just saw you trying to speak.
Yeah, I think it's relevant. As Josh said, we've kind of improved the way that we collect data for the Latin music. We didn't have streaming data incorporated maybe 3 or 4 years ago, so we brought that online. And when Despacito came out, you know, the market was at a point where, you know, one big release, especially a crossover release, would swing the market like way up and down. And now I think we're at a point in the Latin market where we can have 5 or 6 big releases come out, and you know, it's not to the point where it's going to, you know, change the story as much. And I think that's, you know, showing the growth of Latin across the board. And it's not just one big pop artist pairing with a Latin person and bringing them along. It's, you know, the actual growth of Latin music is driving the growth at this point. Whereas maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about, you know, the success of a crossover song. So I think,
yeah, it was less hit driven. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And another question from the report that we didn't talk about is that for the first time in a few years, you are including vinyls. And I would like to know like how you actually explain this growth or this interest, recovered interest on this product, and why this is not actually applying that much to the Latin market nowadays.
Yeah, that's a good question on that last one. So, you know, we've had a lot of conversations about the vinyl explosion overall, and that's been an overall US market thing. And it's also been a global trend that we've seen vinyl coming back. The why is, I don't know if I don't think there's one reason. I think there are a couple of reasons. You know, I think broadly, you know, we're all living in a very digital world. And I think a vinyl record is offering something that is the tangible connection with the artist is much stronger, I think, with an actual physical product than just listening to the song. You know, you could listen on Spotify, you could listen in a variety of ways, but if you're a super fan, you're looking to connect to the artist more deeply. And I think a physical product, especially vinyl, which has, you know, it's big, you could see it, it's got the artwork, it's got the, you know, it has the, you know, inside, it's got the lyrics maybe, or some kind of booklet. For fans who are really into an artist, it lets them connect in a deeper way than just listening. You know, it's listening plus, you know, the same way people might have t-shirts or posters or want to go to the concert to create that connection. So I think vinyl does a really good job of connecting with the artist for fans. The other thing is um, there's the collectability factor, and I think, you know, people enjoy creating and curating their own music collection, and it's easy to share it and show it to people. You know, if you have vinyl records on your walls or on, you know, it's very easy for people to see them, and that kind of says something about who you are. It's a way of connecting to other people and showing something about you, and that's tougher to do with digital formats. So there are a lot of factors. You know, I'll note, you know, the vinyl is being purchased by lots of different people. It is not just older people reliving classic rock. If you look at the top vinyl albums sold for the year, I mean, there's Beatles and Pink Floyd, but there's also Billie Eilish and Taylor Swift. So it's a bit kind of all over the place. You know, I unfortunately, I don't think I have a lot of information as to why, but we have not seen that same level of crossover that we saw in the overall market. We've not seen it for Latin music on the vinyl side, and I'm sorry I don't have a lot more insight into that. It just, I guess, it has not connected the same way.
I have something that is not supported by data. It's just kind of my own observation. So this could be completely wrong, but I think, the investment in Latin music in vinyl's heyday was not very large. So, and I think there's a nostalgia aspect to the resurgence. So people who used to buy vinyl are coming back to it now. So there's that portion of the new purchases where, you don't have that built into the Latin market. And I think it's going to be mostly people who are listening to vinyl for the first time. And I think, the format is one that people really like and get addicted to. So, hopefully that translates into something down the road. But yeah, Josh and I had to work pretty hard to get that in for the first time. So we don't have a lot of information historically to look back at, relative to like if we look at the late 70s and 80s for the vinyl market for the overall US.
I want to take a second just to mention something about the industry. When I did the presentation, I specifically talked about industry transformation. And this is one of the areas that I think, this is one of the areas that makes me very proud to work in the music industry right now. We have our challenges. There are things that we've done in the past that weren't great, but over the last 10 years, the degree to which record labels and artists have changed how they do business to meet fans' needs has been remarkable. And I think Latin is part of that. I'm sorry, I think vinyl is part of that story, because what the labels are saying, what the artists are saying is, if you want to listen to, in the most cutting edge, mobile, on demand, listen anywhere on your phone, we have that for you. You want a CD to listen in your car? We've got that for you too. You want to listen on 100-year-old format that's relatively inconvenient and pretty expensive and wears out? We have that for you too. So the industry is meeting fans wherever they want to be met, whether it's literally a century-old format to TikTok. There is something for you. And I think that's been a real point of pride to the way the industry has adapted to new technology and old technology.
Yeah, so now I would like to ask you specifically about the difference that you notice from the research of the data of 2020 versus the data of 2019, for example, and how the pandemic kind of changed some of the tendencies and made the data vary significantly in some areas more than others. So what is like the things that actually like caught more your attention about the results and why you think that this happened? And also, I would like to know if you found, uh, and this is something that we've been talking a lot in labs as well, if you found some kind of relationship in between how the music is being consumed versus the impossibility of actually going to watch a concert live and having that direct experience and also being able to purchase the products on site. uh, and what is your view about that? Thank you.
So let's talk about that second part first, because the lack of live music was the biggest impact for the industry. And that's not something reflected in the data that Matt and I put together. We're focused on the recorded side of the market, but just because we're talking about growth there does not mean we don't see that artists really suffered a lot in 2020 because they couldn't tour. And we recognize that touring can be a big part of an artist's revenue stream. So that really hurt. And the venues are really important. I mean, I live a couple of blocks away from a couple of venues here in DC. One of them closed down. The 930 Club is around the corner, and that's been a major part of my music experience in DC has been going to 930 Club. I can't count how many shows I've been to there. And that not being there really impacts just my whole appreciation of music and my ability to do that. So even though that's not directly reflected in our data, we're very aware of it. As far as what we saw from COVID impact, it was the impact is significant, but because streaming and digital had become such a big part of the market, I think that acted as a buffer to make the damage a lot less than it could have been on the recorded music side. So obviously for streaming music, people they're home, they have time to listen to music. their attention might have been diverted. And especially when you talk about Q2 last year, from the lockdowns basically started in March. The RIAA actually moved offices in March. We completely unrelated to the pandemic, we had to move our offices because our lease was up, and we all had to come in and get our stuff done really, really fast. And then we have a new office sitting for us that we haven't even been to yet. So that Q2, April, May, June, we really saw a big impact. We saw it on the physical side because obviously people weren't going to stores. They were more worried about finding, getting groceries than they were about buying physical music. So that had a big impact. And I think the area that people might find surprising, though, is that the streaming revenues from ads was down. So ad supported revenues, so Pandora, YouTube, free Spotify. I don't know if you'll recall, but a lot of companies were really panicking and they stopped buying ads. So ad revenue in the United States was down across the board, not just for music, for all media. That hit music too. And we saw a big hit to ad-based revenues, which hurt Latin music specifically, because Latin music is, as we said before, is more dependent on those ad-based revenues. So that was a big impact that we saw in the second quarter. Let me add though, one thing that we saw in it was Q3 and Q4. And I think this really speaks to how incredible music fans are. In the US, there's something called Record Store Day, where lots of bands put out special releases, and it's really focused on indie record shops where there are all kinds of special one-offs. That's usually in April. And of course, it was canceled last year. They rescheduled it for not one day, but they did 3 different weekends. I think it was in September and October, or October and November. And we really saw fans come out. I mean, in my neighborhood, I literally saw people online in the street because they couldn't wait in the store. They were online 6 feet apart down the block for this one little record store that's near me. It was really incredible to see how fans came back. And in the second half, we absolutely saw an impact on physical sales, actually rebounding really, really nicely after Q2 was really, really tough. And I just think that just says how important music is to fans. And I think it's an amazing story of what fans were able to do. So that's really where we saw the impact. We saw the streaming numbers continue to grow, which is great. We saw in that Q2, we saw a record number of people signing up for subscriptions. So people were home and listening. And of course, it doesn't impact our revenue data because in the US, there's no performance right for any of the students who are not in the United States. Unlike every other civilized country, when your music gets played on the radio, you do not get paid in the United States, which is a major frustration. But in-car listening, which is very radio dominant, was way down. People weren't commuting to work, so they weren't listening to radio in the car. That did not impact our revenues because that's zero in the United States, but that had a meaningful impact in other countries. So in other countries, you do get paid when you get played on the radio. And that was really impacted negatively by people not being in their cars as much.
I think it's important to highlight what Josh said. He kind of said that in 2 separate pieces, but with the ad-supported revenue being down, that doesn't mean that people were listening less. That just means the money coming through.
That's right.
Less. People were listening way more. So when you look at our revenue numbers and you see that dip in the first half, you would think, oh, people aren't listening to the YouTube, when it's in fact the opposite. A lot of people were listening to these services. And it was just affected by the slowdown in the ad funding coming through.
Yep.
So the next natural question is more about if actually what is generating more interest, and of course is like moving the industry forward, are the streaming services, but they are paying these like very, very small fees to artists. How is, I know that you don't know like how the tendency is gonna be, but if there has been like some meaningful, at least like conversations or tendencies already that may indicate that they are like reframing the way that they are gonna be paying artists for that?
What you're asking is an ongoing question for the industry. Matt and I are not so in the know that we get to be part of those discussions. So we don't have deeper insight than what you could pick up from the news. But as we think about, kind of the changing of the industry, I think one of the things we're seeing though is you're seeing more variety in business models, and that variety can have different ways of being paid. So historically, the only way you got paid was you sell something up front and then you get paid for that one thing, and that's it, right? You buy the CD, you listen to it one time, you listen to it 5,000 times, the artist gets paid exactly the same amount. With streaming, this is now what we call these access models, where you're accessing the music instead of owning it. Under the access models, the artist gets paid every time you listen. That's new. So what that means is that you have revenue over a longer period. It used to be you get all your money up front and then you never hear from it again. Now, if you put out some great piece of music, if people are listening to it, if the same person listens to it over and over again, you get paid for it over and over again. So that was a big transformation. The next transformation, though, is moving to different kinds of businesses. So now, the previous access was to services like Spotify, but the next piece is the industry is, let's say we're talking about TikTok, a short form video. So now we're introducing more variety in terms of the business models. There's like a paid subscription, and even in paid subscription, there's student plans and family plans and individual plans. Then you have internet radio, which has a different licensing model. And now you have TikTok and you have live streaming. So I can't speak very much to how the terms themselves are changing, but the models are different. The interaction that you get from a TikTok video is very different from the interaction from Spotify. So we're seeing, I think, a different kind of diversity in the business models. And I think that'll be really interesting to see play out. I'm sorry I don't have more detail to add, though, about what that means for licensing terms.
One other performance rights piece that we don't actually get to control, but we, our people that we work with lobby very hard to get the best rate for. A lot of these rates are set in courts that, aren't determined by the free market with us, and they have to go in front of a rate judge, and that's what is set for the internet and satellite radio. So that part of the industry you could probably follow along with if you follow those rate proceedings. They're pretty dry, so I don't know how you would do that on a regular basis, but that was just outside of what Josh was talking about.
No, that's a really good point. And for people who don't know, the way it works is for satellite radio, musicians get paid something on the order of 15%. It's a public number. We can look it up. It's like 15.5% of revenue. So of all the revenue Sirius makes on satellite radio, the artist pool, the pool that goes to artists and labels, is about 15% of it. Pandora and internet radio is very different. For them, it's literally for every play, you get some fraction of a penny, and it's like a fifth of a penny. You can look up the rate for that too. So every time your song is played on Pandora, or every time your song is played on an internet radio station, that's generating like a fifth of a penny for the artist and the label. So they're very different business models from the subscription models, where it's like, the consumer pays some amount and then it gets fractioned out from there.
Yeah, if you are okay with that, it's the time to open it up for questions, because we have some in the chat. The first one is from Michelle, who is the president of the Labs Berkeley Association. And she is asking specifically, have you seen an uptake in brands wanting to work with Latin artists?
I think anecdotally, the answer is yes. One of the things that you might be aware of is we do the Gold and Platinum program, and for Latin music, it's the RIAA Platino. One of the uses of that is that it helps give bands that kind of brand identity, so that people know who they are. A major brand might not know who a specific Latin artist is, but if that artist has gone gold or platinum or RIAA Platino, that helps give them a little more of a platform to get radio play, to get attention from brands. And this kind of partnership I would say across the board, not just for Latin music. I think across the board, we've seen an uptick in this kind of working together in the last couple of years. Certainly a much bigger part of the industry than it was in the past.
I think anecdotally, look at things like the Super Bowl and you look at the commercials there, you saw 4 or 5 commercials with, the biggest Latin artists. And then when you watch your network television, all the commercials, like a Corona commercial will have 3 Latin artists in it. So I think just from my perspective, no data to back it up, I really have seen that partnership grow.
Thank you so much. The second question that comes from Sebastian Torres is specifically asking, when you say Latin music, what kind of artists you are talking about?
We're using the term, we've said Latin music and Latin artists, we certainly, just so everybody understands, we try very hard not to use any of these words in a way that anyone will believe is derogatory or meant to imply anything. When we say it, we're specifically talking about Spanish music. That's just how we categorize Spanish music. And I think Brazilian music, Portuguese might be in there as well. We don't define it by artist. We define it by the music. So when we say Latin music, it could be music in Spanish sung by anybody. If it also could be music that's in a traditional Spanish style, like if it's flamenco music, it doesn't matter who it's by. If it's flamenco, we're going to characterize it as Latin music in the United States. So we're defining it based on the product, not based on the artist. That can get tricky sometimes if it's not, we say the Spanish style because let's say it's flamenco music that, let's say it doesn't have vocals. Then you'd say, well, it's not, I don't know if it's in Spanish or not, there's no vocals, but we'd say it's a traditional Spanish style. And there are a couple of Spanish, there are subgenres of Latin music. We used to try to collect data on it. We have found it to be increasingly difficult to break out data by regional Mexican or pop or other subgenres of Latin music, but they certainly are there, and they are all being included to the best of our abilities in this category. So it's really about the content of the music. So Despacito, even though it's Justin Bieber singing some of the lyrics in English, since the song is primarily in Spanish, that's going to be included in our data.
I think that's the biggest challenge with this Latin music report that we have. When we were bringing on these new formats that don't tie directly to our audited financial systems, we had to have really in-depth conversations with our members about what are we including. And I think what Josh and I always try to do is be consistent year over year, and we never try to portray this data as 1000% accurate. I think we understand that we're probably missing some artists out there. The way we collect the indie data provides a little bit of error. The way we collect internally provides a little bit of error. But if we do it consistently year over year, the growth is what we really want to represent, and not try to get every decimal of every dollar from a Latin artist, because if you sit 10 people around a table, nobody's going to agree what Latin music means. But it's really challenging when you're doing, financial, information, massive collections with so many inputs. And I think that's the balancing act we have to try to do with this report. So if any of the students have ideas of how to better do that, we're all welcome.
We try to be transparent about our method. We're obviously pulling data from a lot of different sources, which makes it difficult. And that's why Matt says, there's going to be error. Our policy is not our data is right. Our policy is whenever we can improve our data, we do. You will see, if you look at our 2020 report, it includes data for 2019 and 2018. That data in 2020 is not the same as when we reported it in 2019. And that's because we're constantly recollecting historical data to make sure that it's right, and that if we get a better methodology, we apply that methodology historically as well. So you'll see our data change from time to time. It's usually very small changes, but we're always trying to improve our methodology. And you'll see, just as an example, the addition of vinyl, that's helping complete the market. And there's other, next year, I'm sure there'll be other new data that we want to include. So we're constantly trying to improve it, which is why we'll never say our data is perfect. It's, I know Matt works really hard. He's the one really doing all the work. Matt works really hard to pull all this together. And, that's, we're happy to be transparent about it. And we'll talk to anybody about how we do it. And if people have ideas for ways it can be improved, we're going to listen.
That's great. And I also think, just to clarify that, yes, Sebastian is saying thank you. Just to clarify that rather than being reductionist, a lot of times is reinforcing why we actually need to get together in associations such as the one that we have, to just like reinforce the importance of like the variety of the Latin industry, but also the strength of it. um and I appreciate you being like really transparent and honest about your methodology, and open as well to listen and to make improvement, which is amazing to see, like after so many years of great work that you are doing, how you are actually still very open to that positive change. And then one question that I got privately, that is always very exciting, was actually about what we were talking before starting the session, that is internship opportunities, specifically uh, for the business students that tend to be more interested in industry research and also legal aspects, copyright, etc.
So the RAA is a relatively small organization. We have about 50 people. We're based in Washington, D.C. We have a few people in California. We have a few people in Miami who actually do a lot of outreach to the Latin labels. The Latin music labels are very much centralized in Miami. We have somebody in Texas too, I believe. We do have an internship program. It is limited to students. Um, there's information about it on our website. Generally, the people who do the internship are interested in an area like policy communications or law. Um, we don't tend to have music positions, unfortunately, and we also don't have a lot in terms of business positions. It's generally people who are focused, usually law students, or people who are really interested in government policy and government policy communications. And we do have we'll have a few interns a few times a year, like 2 or 3. It's pretty small, and you have to do it for credit. That's the only way to do it, is if you're going to get credit from your school. So if there's anybody interested, you're certainly welcome to apply. I'm certainly happy to point you in the right direction if you want to email. But I just want everybody should go in with their eyes open about, kind of, it's we're not a record label. It's not as much fun. We're very much DC policy focused. But if that's your area of interest, then it might be an appropriate thing, and I'd encourage you to apply.
Yeah, I would say if you're looking to get into the Latin space, the labels would definitely be the place to reach out to. Having said that, Josh and I don't really own the data. We're not like a collection hub where we're getting all this streaming information. We have to like get the data from our member companies. But there are a lot of projects that are on the horizon, like the emergence of TikTok and all these new services that Josh and I don't completely understand yet, because we don't use them all the time. We really need to understand how they're growing. So if you have an idea in mind for a project that you want to do for school, and you need data that you think we could help, and you come to us with that, I think that's a good way to approach at least Josh and I for an internship, because sometimes we'll work with interns, and it's really hard for us to break up our small little data sets to have interns work on them whenever we don't have good ideas. And I think that's the hardest part of an internship, having several whenever I was in college and coming out, is having an idea for what projects you want to work on. So that would definitely help if you have something you want to work on.
Absolutely.
So yeah, finally, to be closing up, because an hour flight, and we are reaching the end, unfortunately, of this meeting, because we are learning so much, and we really appreciate again you being here today with us. Of course, this is recorded, so we are also gonna share it with all the members, and also with everybody that reaches out asking for this information, and to the music business department as well. So finally, we would like to know if you have any specific sources of information, links that you could share with us that could be interesting. for our audience, as well as how to actually get in touch with you and get access to all of the work and reports that you are putting together. Thank you.
Sure. All of these reports are always up on our website. Um, if anybody wants to email, I'm Jay Friedlander at RIAA.com. Matt is mbass at RIAA.com. We're always happy to talk to students. I think most of the deck that we shared today can be shared. In terms of where to read, you know, generally we follow the trade magazines. We're going to try to follow Billboard for the most part. There are some online newsletters. We certainly try to put out information about the industry, but it's very DC policy focused. There's no shortage of ways to keep up with artists, whether it's through social media or other news outlets. But in terms of like our data, I would follow. It's basically our material, and then it's basically like Billboard, or that's where you're going to find most of the information about the industry economics and how the business is doing.
I think Josh missed an opportunity to promote his own social website.
Our Twitters.
Twitter. We have Twitters where joking around, but actually all the research that we put out, we have on our main RIAA Twitter. Josh has a good feed on his where he interacts with members of the data community and the music community. I just copied some links into the chat for our sales database online. It's not specific to Latin music, but if you want to look at the trends in the US, that's in there. And also our gold and platinum database. There's a lot of Latin artists in there, and we do have separate program for Latin certifications. And if you have any questions about that, our colleague Liz Kennedy would be who you want to get in touch with. But feel free to reach out to Josh or I, and we can help put you in touch with the right people. But yes, follow Josh on Twitter.
Josh, are you gonna play for us? Because you were mentioning before.
Oh no, that is definitely not going to happen.
You were expecting music, and then Matt said that you were playing guitar.
Oh, that is definitely not going to happen. Yeah.
I can share pictures of Josh's playing days if people are interested.
Oh, great. Okay.
Next time. At least we can go to Twitter and check it. So yeah, we have the tags here, RIAA, and then Josh P. Fried. So you have it here in the chat if you want to check it. Of course, now I am very curious, so I'm just gonna go and stalk you for a little bit. And then thank you so much again from